My crack research team has just uncovered a breaking scandal. USAID funneling taxpayer money to fund the global disarmament agenda through the United Nations Small Arms Treaty. Now, unless you've been living under a rock, you've heard about the dump truck worth of waste, fraud, and abuse at USAID that has been exposed by Elon Musk and his DOGE team. The headlines have been replete with unearthed programs of ridiculous intent, coupled with staggering price tags. Things such as encouraging homosexual basket weaving drum circles in Pakistan, or training shellfish to use gym equipment, just to name a few examples. This is the product of everyone and their mom having spent the last week and a half combing through the 990 forms and grant documents looking for damning evidence of what we've all guessed was happening over the years. It's liberals feeding at the never-ending federal trough. In other words, your money. While these instances of woke nonsense are truly wastes of money, they don't really capture what many of us have known for some time, that our taxpayer dollars aren't just being wasted, they're being weaponized against us, against our country's founding principles. Now, we've found some alarming data that suggests our tax dollars have been funneled into civilian disarmament schemes at the UN. But let me first briefly set the stage. The UN, Mexico, and a slew of anti-gun senators and state attorney generals are suing an American arms manufacturer, not for defective products or misleading advertising, but simply for making arms that have been used in crimes by Mexican drug cartels. Not here in the US, but in Mexico. Why on earth would any party involved think this would be a good idea, or hell, even think it would even work? No, simple. The idea was birthed here by anti-gun bureaucrats and crooked politicians, and now we know shell charities, foundations, and other nonprofits, all with your tax dollars. Now, last year, some staff and I traveled to Geneva, Switzerland, to voice your opposition to the UN ATT. During that time, we met a lot of interesting people and dug up some surprising intel. And before I go on, if you don't know what the UN ATT is, click here for a full synopsis. But to paraphrase, it's the UN's Arms Trade Treaty, which comprises a horde of nations who have signed on to limit arms via import and export restrictions across the world. But what they spend a large chunk of their time on is encouraging global civilian disarmament. And who do you think is the main target of this globalist scheme? Let me answer that for you. It's you, me, and every American gun owner. At the conference last August, I met with a representative of the US by the name of William Malzahn, and I'm calling him the Anthony Fauci of gun control, running the Wuhan lab of bad ideas. Now, I had just finished speaking in front of the assembly about how it had been our mission to ensure that this treaty was never ratified in the US. And after my speech, this US rep, a US citizen, showed nothing but arrogance and disdain for the constitutional rights he took an oath to protect. The American representative to the Arms Trade Treaty, I introduced myself to him the very first day, figured, hey, he works for me, right? Works for my government. He said he helped draft the original ATT. And
okay, so not our type of American.
Not really our type of American. And he immediately led off with, I don't agree with you. He said, I think that the state should have the sole monopoly over the tools of self-defense.
Oh, that's not concerning.
No, not concerning at all.
Yeah.
We also noted that several NGOs, non-governmental organizations, were doing most of the heavy lifting at this conference, hosting breakout sessions and high-dollar cocktail hours for attendees on the impact of the treaty, and even going out of their way to suggest how to soften the blow of civilian disarmament to their own citizenry. Here's the rub. Since the US has not ratified the treaty, they have to play coy in regards to pushing it. So they peddle their influence via soft power. Now, this is a tried and true tool that's been used in statecraft since before any of us were born. And if you've been paying attention to some of the more seasoned investigators on this whole USAID debacle, you may have heard that term, soft power. This method allows the U.S. to subtly nudge an ally or a foe in a particular direction without the use of the military or hard economic sanctions or actions. When you look at some of these initiatives, subtle may not be the first word that comes to mind, but I can assure you they are far more subtle than a warhead. Now you might be thinking, I don't mind the U.S. promoting its views around the globe in order to maximize U.S. interests. And I would likely agree with you on that. We have here is the U.S. using your money to enable and educate globalists to undermine our way of life, and in this instance, our Second Amendment to the Constitution. Let's look at where some of these NGOs that are working against us are getting their funding. The 2023 tax documents show a paper trail of Control Arms, a British NGO dedicated to the complete global civilian disarmament, receiving USAID money. Now remember when I referred to the so-called charities doing the heavy lifting at the UN? Yeah, Control Arms is the heavy lifter for the Arms Trade Treaty. We found money being funneled with more than 4 layers of NGOs and nonprofits to cover up where it's coming from and where it's going. It's this little shell game where the sleight of hand and subterfuge are the method they use to hide their nefarious agenda and avoid the scrutiny of their smoke-filled rooms. The organization directly receiving USAID funds is called Internews Network, and it's dependent on USAID for 93% of its funding. Internews Network preaches on how their works resulted in increased governmental and institutional accountability and transparency, listing transparency as one of their areas of expertise. That's funny. All this money eventually makes its way to the Tide Center, which received over $35 million in government funding in 2023. The Tide Center then gives its money to its sister organization, the Tides Foundation. Now, the Tides Foundation claims it has not received any governmental funds or grants in 2023. But as you can see here, that's not the truth. Finally, this funding is passed down to Nonviolence International, the nonprofit funding component of Control Arms. In fact, if you try to donate on the Control Arms website, it immediately redirects you to the page for Nonviolence International. And Nonviolence International receives $210,000 from the Tides Foundation in 2023. Now, Control Arms claims to have been one of the largest driving forces on the Small Arms Treaty. Quotes, with over 300 civil society partner organizations in all regions of the world, Control Arms successfully campaigned for the creation and adoption of the ATT. While Control Arms has virtually no transparency with its spending, the Twitter page Data Republican has some rough estimates for how much U.S. taxpayer money is going to its fake shell charity. Data Republican estimates that U.S. funding made up nearly 8% of Nonviolence International's budget in 2023. Now, this is where it gets juicy. If you look at the stream of money that originates at USAID and makes its way to all these despicable fake charities, you will see the same trend. The money changes hands several times, making it hard to track and even harder to assert concrete claims on the intention of the transfer. But the idea of a slush fund is hardly new. This would also hardly be the first time that corrupt actors in the international community would bend the rules in order to meet an objective. None of this is happenstance or coincidence. This is by design. There exists a cabal in our own government that deeply hates you, me, and what we believe. They want to fundamentally change the nature of this republic. And since they can't do it outright, these are the methods they've left to exploit. Look, I don't buy every conspiracy, but this is clear. Gun control elites are using your money to advance their global disarmament agenda, and they don't want you to know. They're stealing your money to equip hostile governments across the globe to centralize power. And if they can't break the U.S., they know they can't win. You and I are the last holdouts. If we lose this fight, there isn't another place in the world to retreat to. There's no bugging out. Now, I'm heading to a meeting in the White House in just a few days, and I assure you, I'll give them chapter and verse about this scheme. Take a moment and sign your petition to Congress and DOGE, alerting them to this scheme and urging them to turn the spigot off and stop funding gun control here and abroad. Thank you.